Thank you so much. We've learned so much from Melbourne, such as how to say it, over the last few days. And all of us that are from the U.S. are a little humble as to why you asked us to come here. You have more to teach us than we to teach you. What we're talking about here is a fundamental change in how we're building the built environment. The built environment, by the way, just so you know how, I'm sure you know what it means. It's of course all the real estate, this building, all of your homes, all the offices that are here in downtown, but also all the infrastructure that supports that. And we've been building the built environment following one path over the last 50, 60 years, particularly in the US, since we invented this way of building the built environment. But there's a structural shift taking place. The market is demanding something different, and we have to respond, because if we don't, we're not going to be relevant. First off, understand the size of what we all have decided to get into as far as the built environment. The built environment, again, is real estate and all the infrastructure, is a mere 35% of the asset base of developed economies. In the U.S., if you took the capitalized value of all New York Stock Exchange companies, all NASDAQ companies, and multiplied them by 2, the built environment's larger. And that's why we in real estate are very proud of the fact that we've caused 2 of the last 3 recessions, including this one, which we did up really well. So as I say, it's the largest asset class in the economy. So when real estate gets a cold, we bring the entire economy down. The second thing, and I'm here talking about sustainability, and so the measure of sustainability I've chosen is CO2 emissions. And when you take a look at where, at least in the US, CO2 emissions come from, over 70% come from the built environment, 40% from our buildings, and 30% from the transportation systems to get between our various buildings. So once you here in Australia and we in the US get serious about dealing with greenhouse gas emissions, which we are not serious, you're not serious, we're not serious, but once we do get serious, obviously the built environment is going to be affected fundamentally. Now, there's only 2 ways of building the built environment that are market viable. Believe it or not, just 2 ways. They're broad categories. There's a lot of variation within each of those 2 categories, but one way is the way that we in the US have discovered over the last century or so, and we really put in place after the Second World War, and you, of course, have followed suit. It's what I refer to as drivable suburban, and we all know what it is. But it's important to note that it's modular in nature, separated from one another. Different land uses are all separate from one another. And of course, the car or trucks connect all those different land uses. Very low density, so a floor area ratio, if you're a planner type, of somewhere between 0.05 and 0.4. That's drivable suburban. And we in the US have gotten very good at doing this stuff, and so have you. And it's really become a formula. And it's what I refer to as the 19 standard product types that we in real estate as developers know how to build, we know how to finance, we know how to zone, and we've gotten really good at doing it. Somewhere after the Second World War, in the US, but as it's obvious here in Melbourne as well, is that we have really only built, for the most part, only drivable suburban places. Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s, and beginning into the 90s, that the vast majority of real estate development was drivable suburban. And that's what the market wanted. It's not as if somebody held a gun to our head. It's not as if General Motors and Ford held a gun to our head to do this. We wanted it. When I was growing up outside of Philadelphia, and I grew up in a walkable urban neighborhood, what you would call today a new urbanist neighborhood. And I didn't need a license until I was 18. But my mother at one point drove me along the then brand new Schuylkill Expressway out to the King of Prussia Mall. And I thought I had died and gone to heaven. I thought this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. We wanted this, and we put in place the subsidies and the laws that demanded that that's what we in real estate build. Well, the second way of building the built environment is walkable urbanism. It's an entirely different mechanism. Much higher density, at least 5 times as dense, many times much higher than that. It'll have obviously mixed use, many ways to get there, but once you're there, it's walkable. So there's 2 ways to build. Now, actually, there is a third way, and it's something that I don't think is market viable. It's drivable density, and this is what, of course, China is specializing in. The slums of Paris to the north of the city are drivable density. And this is basically Corbusier's legacy to us, where you basically live in a high-rise, you come down to the ground floor, and it's surrounded by parking lots, and you drive to your big box shopping center. To me, it's sort of the worst of both worlds. So there is a third way, but the 2 market viable ones, drivable suburban, walkable urban. Now, just to show, I hang my hat at the Brookings Institution, which is a think tank in Washington, and just to demonstrate how rigorous we are at Brookings, I make all my interns and all my researchers watch movies to understand these things. And the best popular movie that I've ever found that really explains this is Back to the Future, the 1985 classic. How many of you know Back to the Future? Oh, good, perfect. You may remember, now you probably don't remember it as well as I do since having watched it about 40 times, that it takes place in 2 different times. In Hill Valley, which is a fictional town, which, by the way, Hill Valley was named, undoubtedly the writers at Universal Studios were thinking that they picked up a trick that we in real estate employ, which is that we name things after what we destroy to build. And so Hill Valley was undoubtedly a hill that was pushed into a valley, and you put a town on top of it. This is Hill Valley back in the mid-50s, when Marty McFly goes back in time. And obviously the downtown is the center of life, and you can get around by car, by truck, by bicycle, by bus, and in the case of Marty, by skateboard. Pretty ideal, huh? Small town Australia, small town America. But even then, the seeds of change had been planted. You may not remember this billboard, but this billboard is advertising the subdivision Marty McFly grew up in 1955, and he parked his DeLorean behind it to try to hide it. And this was, even then, indicating that the pendulum was swinging. So when you fast forward to 1985, here is downtown Hill Valley in 1985. And it's an entirely different place, as we in the US in particular left behind our downtowns and abandoned them.
Oh, Brett, you look great. Everything looks great. 124. I still got time. Coming back.
So there's the old downtown. It's been abandoned. The plaza has been turned into a surface parking lot, and only homeless are there at night. So go out to the new town center, and you know what it is. It's the regional mall. So I've got a couple questions for you. One is, think about what the regional mall was named after, using that old trick that we in real estate have employed. And number two, in this clip, ask yourself what has happened in this clip that never happens in real life. So obviously the mall was named after the one pine tree that they had to bulldoze to put the mall there. And so what happened going down that drive? Yeah, nobody ever walked or ran down that drive. They only drove down it. So you can see the two ways of building, fundamentally different. They're apples and oranges. And it's really, though, a reflection of the underlying economy. How we build the built environment is a direct reflection of the economy of the era. So you go back 150, 200 years, back when Australia and the US was an agricultural economy. And there, the best way to describe how we use the land is, and to live the American dream, was a Civil War phrase, 40 acres and a mule. If you had 40 acres and a mule, you could live a great American dream, or here in Australia. And keep in mind that back in 1800, when we took the first census, 82% of folks living in the US were farmers. 8% lived in walkable towns and cities. When you fast forward to the industrial era that gained speed in the 20th century, it's important to note, and you may not know this, that over 40% of all jobs were directly and indirectly related to building and maintaining the car. That the raw material that went into it, the manufacturing of it, the financing of it, the maintaining of it, the sailing of it, the building of the roads so it could move, all of that work, and of course the fueling of it with oil, that over 40% of us made our living. So it would only make sense that we would put in place a built environment that required the car. As we drove back and forth to our Ozzie and Harriet homes, we were making ourselves wealthier.